I'm Rob,
And I'm Nate.
and welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Sir Ian McKellen, Jeremy Britt, Basil Rathbone, Frank Langella, Peter Cushing, John Barrymore, James Darkey, Michael Caine, John Cleese, Peter Cook, Rupert Everett, William Gillette, Stuart Granger, Charlton Heston, Anthony Higgins, Raymond Macy, Roger Moore, John Neville, Leonard Nimoy, Christopher Plummer, Jonathan Pryce, Nicole Williamson, and Robert Downey Jr. have all played the theme character of this coming month.
Sherlock Holmes.
It is week 1 of Sherlock Holmes month.
Yep, and this week we started out with the 2009 Sherlock Holmes starring Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, Rachel McAdams. Decent cast to this film.
Decent cast. Good cast.
Mark Strong as Lord Henry Blackwood. He's a good baddie. Yeah.
He's a reliable baddie.
Yep. This was your first time seeing this film, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Any thoughts on first time viewing?
Well, I remember when this came out, and I remember being kind of excited by it, about the idea. Like once you saw the casting of Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr., you're like, yeah. Now I think the casting may be too obvious.
Why is that?
Well, it almost too on the nose.
Okay.
And we'll get into this in more detail, but this film, by and large, did not work for me.
Yeah. I remember seeing this film. I think I saw it in the theaters. I'm pretty sure I saw it in the theaters. I liked this film. I still think it's an enjoyable film. I seem to not have as many issues with this film as Nate does, though there are a few errors and there are a few issues with this film, but generally I think it's okay. And just touching quickly on the plot, Sherlock Holmes and his ever-stalwart partner Watson engage in a battle of wits and brawn with a nemesis whose plot is a threat to all of England, as Lord Blackwater wants to take over and take back America and everything else.
Install himself as a dictator.
Yep.
An attempt to take over the world through the use of supernatural means.
Yeah.
Or reportedly supernatural means.
And this film was directed by Guy Ritchie. Do you know much about him in terms of as a director?
Well, I know he's got a distinctive style. I'm not positive if I've ever seen a Guy Ritchie film, but I know his reputation, visuals, action. He's English, and he was married to Madonna.
You have certainly seen Guy Ritchie directed films. He directed the new Aladdin adaptation.
Haven't seen it.
He directed The Man from U.N.C.L.E. This.
I started that, and I didn't finish
Have
it.
you seen Rock and Rolla?
No.
What about Snatch?
Uh-uh.
So those are probably his most well-known. In fact, his most referenced is his known for is this film, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, and the 2019 Aladdin.
Yeah, haven't seen him.
The ones that I've seen, in particular the new Aladdin, not necessarily my favorite. I think of those, probably this might be the better of those. But yeah, Nate probably seems to disagree on that. Well, let me rephrase that. Nate doesn't know his filmography. Nate doesn't necessarily disagree. He just doesn't agree with this as being good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess touch briefly on a couple of the other characters. Inspector Lestrade is played by Eddie Marsan.
Usually reliable.
Dredger is Robert Millay.
Dredger.
Yeah.
That was a highlight for me because my last name is Dredge, and this is the closest I've come to seeing my last name in film. It surpasses the previous holder, which was a character also named Dredger, a Lieutenant Dredger, referred to twice but never seen on the series Manhattan. My name does not get in lights.
Geraldine James plays Mrs. Hudson, and Mary Morstan was played by Kelly Riley. Constable Clark was William Houston. Lord Coward was Hans Matheson. I think that's pretty much
And James Fox is Sir Thomas
Rotherham. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all we need to mention. That's the majority of our characters here in this film.
What do you like this film?
I thought the pacing was done well. It seems to, well, I liked parts of the pacing. I did think the pacing was done relatively well. I think it starts off at a high tempo.
It does.
A tempo that it, for the most part, maintains. There's a few lulls in the middle, but for the most part, it maintains that same type of pacing. It has some witty dialogue.
Some.
Yeah, in fact, it right from the get-go, it kind of gives some personality to some of the characters, like with Watson whether when they're in that punch bowl place or whatever, Watson, after Holmes stops him from getting stabbed by the glass, the way he uses his cane to club Lord Blackwater before he goes to check on the patient, Watson's maybe a little more assertive in this adaptation, perhaps, though not excessively. One of the things that you took umbrage with, though, was the early establishment of Holmes's ability to read people.
Yeah, so they have this scene. Watson is engaged or engaged to be engaged to Kelly Riley, and Holmes is not so pleased about breaking up their living together relationship, and so he basically, Watson has to con Holmes into meeting them for dinner. And then, of course, Kelly Riley knows his reputation. Do a read on me, do a read on me. And they're like, maybe not. It's like, she asked for it. And so he puts together not the most flattering interpretation of her background, which results in him getting wine in the face. And this felt like it was a scene obviously designed to introduce and familiarize viewers with, oh, he's super logical and he can figure things out out of seemingly no information, which is, yes, he's Sherlock Holmes. It's super obvious. It didn't feel like you needed to establish that. I felt a little...
I felt
maybe
like
you did, because modern audiences maybe don't know that.
Well, I felt like you maybe missed the level to which they were going and how well he understands it. And this isn't even the first attempt to establish that. They've done it through 2 previous fight scenes at this point. And also, you seem to have missed until I pointed it out to you, that not only has he foreseen this reading of her, but he's foreseen it to the point that she's going to throw her drink in his face and leave, and he's ordered his dinner to arrive the moment she leaves.
Indeed. But I think that you didn't notice that either. I think you looked that up.
Nope. I noticed that from the get-go.
You did notice it? Okay.
Yep, from the very first time I viewed it.
Well, maybe I didn't pick up on it.
That's okay.
Obviously, I didn't.
That's okay.
I wasn't super engaged for large portions of this movie.
What did you think of the scoring of this film?
The scoring gets kind of memorable towards the end. It has kind of it's got kind of an odd musical choice towards the end. I thought it was mostly forgettable up until then.
Really? I actually noted it relatively early, and I thought it was pretty consistent throughout. The composer for this was Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
Who clearly is a talented composer. I actually didn't know that it was Hans Zimmer was the composer. Like, I didn't place that until today. But I've liked the score to this. I thought it was a consistent score. Sometimes for me the mark of a good score is it blending in.
Zimmer, of course, has quite the credits to his name: Gladiator, Inception, Interstellar, The Dark Knight, the original Lion King, Rain Man. So yeah, he's a name I definitely recognize.
Yeah, a talented composer and whatnot. So yeah. So did you? One thing that I wanted to touch on. This film deals with Sherlock Holmes's drug use more lightly than other adaptations.
Yeah.
It actually kind of, in the way it goes about dealing with it, it kind of almost plays it off. Unless you kind of know what you're looking for. It's.
Well, this movie is full of setting things up for later. And I know they did make a sequel. And, of course, they hint at Moriarty. They kind of introduce him, but you never see his face.
There's a tidbit about Moriarty I'll get to later. In fact, actually, the person who voiced Moriarty in the theatrical release is uncredited. And then they decided who was going to be Moriarty in the sequel and redubbed the parts of Moriarty for the DVD release so it would all have the same voice.
Interesting.
Going forward. I forget who was the voice of Moriarty.
Jared Harris.
Yeah. But so it was redubbed, but you notice they don't ever actually show anything of Moriarty that could give it away. And like I said, they redubbed it for the DVD release so it would be the same. But yeah, so the reference to Holmes's drug use in this is at one point Watson tells him something along the lines of he's drinking something meant for eye surgery, which is an anecdote referencing the fact that cocaine was used as a local anesthetic for eye surgeries at one point.
We will be dealing later in this month in much more detail with Holmes' substance abuse problem.
Yeah, and that's always a reoccurring theme in Sherlock Holmes stories, but I thought it was an interesting directorial choice to touch on it in such a light way. Didn't seem to make an impression on you, though, right?
No.
Did you enjoy any of the banter between Holmes and Watson?
It was okay.
Just okay.
They had an easy chemistry, I suppose.
Yeah.
But again, so should we start to go into my issues with
Sure.
this movie?
Sure.
We could go in any number of directions. I thought it started out too big. I prefer Sherlock Holmes not to be saving the world, at least not at first. I think they started up with too big of an adventure. I would have liked to start slowly. And I understand that this film is trying to modernize it and make it more kinetic, and Guy Ritchie is directing, and they've handsome-fied the leads. I don't picture Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson looking as strapping as Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law doing this. The choice of the mystical elements was kind of interesting in that plays off of this dichotomy in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's life, where he creates the supremely logical hero in Sherlock Holmes, but seemed to be kind of dubious and into spiritualism and other stuff like that. So I kind of like that. That was almost a reference to that part of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, part of the creator. But I didn't like the fact that it was just too contemporary and too big. So we had both seen the two principal versions of Murder on the Orient Express. There's the 1970s version and the version that came out a couple of years ago. And a big complaint I had about that version, and I think you did too, was a lot of the unnecessary movement. We're going to stop the train, and we're going to have a chase scene, and we're going to add different kinetics. And I didn't need it in that story. Yeah. I wanted it to be closer to the source material. I wanted it to be a staid kind of drawing room thing. And that's how I like Holmes. I don't like Holmes getting into boxing matches. I think of Holmes as principally intellectual, not that he didn't have that intellectual element here, but they were just kind of watering him down and making him a more generic hero, and I don't like that.
Have you read much of the Arthur
I've
Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes?
I've read a number of the stories. I've read the first novella, A Study in Scarlet, and I know where you're going with this. You're going with, you have this kind of stereotyped conception of Holmes, and that Holmes in the story was more athletic, which I've heard, but I'm not positive if that's true.
Well, more specifically, what I was getting at was, I remember, I don't remember all the ones that I've read in excessive detail, but I do remember repeatedly in the books enjoying the banter between Holmes and Watson. That's something that seems to be not as emphasized in other adaptations that I've seen. In particular, the BBC Sherlock. Watson's more of a just companion character in that one. Mm-hmm. There are, in some of the Arthur Conan Doyle's ones, there are times when Sherlock Holmes gets in a fight. They are exaggerated in this one, but when he does get in a fight, it's well thought out. He's steps ahead of the person he's fighting. So I didn't take particular umbrage with that in this, but that wasn't my primary reason for asking. I was just curious how many of the Arthur Conan Doyles that you've read. I think I've read all but 2 or 3.
Oh, really?
So I haven't read very many of the other Sherlock Holmes adaptations. I mostly have only read the Arthur Conan Doyles.
And a lot of what we're going to be doing this month, at least in the ones that I've selected, are revisionist Sherlock Holmes, which I do like. I like revisionist Sherlock Holmes, and we'll get into that. But this was just too mainstreamy, big action piece and shoehorning Holmes into it, and it just did not work for me. It was flat, and I'm gonna do a comparison to a movie that I watched the other week that I don't think I've talked to you about yet.
Okay.
This is gonna be out of left field. I watched MacGruber from the sketches from Saturday Night Live with Will Forte, which basically was spoofing MacGyver.
Yeah.
And they were 90-second sketches, and they should have remained 90-second sketches, because you stretch that out to an hour and a half, it just wasn't good. It was a film that I referred to as 20% funny and 80% stupid. This movie is 25% engaging and 75% boring.
See, and I would have flipped that about the other way around. I enjoyed probably about 70% of this, and thought about 30% of it was, off. And some of the scenes that I thought were not great, you seem to enjoy, like the palm reader, the gypsy lady.
The palm reader, and that's, 40 minutes in?
Yeah.
That was the first time that I was amused in the course of this film.
See, and I thought that was one of the weak spots of this film. Yeah. When, in the books at least, when Sherlock Holmes wants to manipulate you, he does a better job of that than that, It would be, if Sherlock Holmes wants to manipulate you, it would be more like the scene at the restaurant with Mary.
Do you know anything about the Irene Adler character? Assayed by Miss Rachel McAdams?
I know a few things about her in the filming of this. I remember a few things from the novels. She wasn't the character that stood out to me the most, so I'd love to hear where you're going
So,
with that.
I mean, what I was able to find out about her is Irene Adler is a character that appears in one Sherlock Holmes story, 1891's The Scandal in Bohemia.
Uh-huh.
But it's a character because it's a smart female of a similar level of intellect to Holmes that has been stolen and readapted many times as the closest female equal from the source material, and is often transformed into a love interest for Holmes, where he doesn't really have those in the original material.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of interesting, because obviously this screenplay, they know about Holmes. You know,
Yeah.
they know enough about him to sprinkle in these references. It's probably smarter, I think, than it appeared on first blush.
And there's a few, I'm going to get into some of that later. I think it might be towards the end of talking about this, but yeah. What did you think of Rachel McAdams as Irene Adler?
She was fine. It was fine. I think I probably would have liked this film if I'd seen it closer to when it came out. But it just all seemed old hat.
One other question for you. So Inspector Lestrade is always, kind of a bumbling idiot.
Yeah.
How did you like their treatment of him in this?
It was fine.
I actually enjoyed the interactions between Holmes and Constable Clark more than I did the interactions between Holmes
Is
and...
Clark's for the movie character, or does Clark have antecedents?
I don't recall off the top of my head, but that scene when they're riding from in the carriage away from the hotel, and he's like, chambermaids used to be such a liberal profession, and he's like, my wife's a chambermaid.
I also liked the little quip between Holmes and Lestrade when
Lestrade
he's
says,
getting outside
you would have
of
made
jail.
in another life you would have made a good criminal, and Holmes says in another life you would have made a good detective or a good policeman. Yeah, I have a bunch of references I'll talk about at some point, but I want to get more of your criticisms on this before I get into
I think
my
that's the heart of
criticisms
it.
and my other references.
That's the heart of it. I think I've pretty much said almost everything I have to say about this movie. It had its moments. It had some engaging sequences. I actually liked the sequence when they're in the slaughterhouse.
Uh-huh.
That was one of the first times in which I felt a sense of caring and of stakes, because I mostly didn't care about these people, but I was just kind of how are they gonna make this work out? I liked that. So it had a scattering of moments like that, but I just thought it was trying to be too big and too loud, and it was too far away from the Sherlock Holmes I wanted.
Well, and I can see some of those, like, for example, that scene at the shipyard where they end up sinking that boat. That seems thoroughly out of place. It made for a good action sequence with Dredger. But outside of that, like when you see the scene of the boat sinking and you start thinking about the monetary damage that would have taken place.
I was having that thought. It's like they're going to get hauled in, and they were.
Yeah. And you don't have a problem with them getting hauled in. You don't have a problem with them periodically getting in trouble with the law. That's actually relatively true to the books. But in terms of scope and stakes, in fact, they never actually fully resolved that in his warrants in this version. Unless you're saying that him having caught Lord Blackwood gets him out of it.
Well, I think you can probably give him a pass given what he prevented happening.
Well, but
Though
not
I don't know
everyone,
anybody's going to realize it.
Yeah, and they don't want to admit the conspiracy theory. So then, what excuse do they come up with to justify his having captured Lord Blackwood as having justified the damage he did at the shipyard?
How the heck did they get up on the Tower Bridge so fast? That made no sense to it. And
that
I
was
think
one of the
they were
inconsistencies.
on the freaking wrong side of the river.
I don't know if they were on the wrong side of the river, but they go straight from Parliament onto the Tower Bridge.
It takes like no time to get to the freaking top of the Tower Bridge.
Seemingly 30 seconds later, she's on the Tower Bridge when it's several minutes away. Also, I don't know if you noticed, that's the wrong Tower Bridge.
Oh, is it?
Yep. That's the Tower Bridge that was built in 1971 to replace the original. So it has the wrong arch and a few other things. The other issues I had with this in terms of a Sherlock Holmes story...
What was the deal with the crow? The crow that follows him around.
Crows are a recurring theme in some of the novels, but I don't remember the exact reference. I mean, the Arthur Conan Doyle novels are not... To call them novels is a stretch.
It seemed to imply a supernatural connection, which, spoiler, the film debunks.
Yeah. It is a reoccurring thing in the Arthur Conan Doyle books, but like I say, calling them novels is, it's kind of like with Agatha Christie. If you listen to Agatha Christie books as an audiobook, most of them are, 2 to 5 hours in length total. And the Arthur Conan Doyle books often are even shorter than Agatha Christie's books.
Well, I think Holmes was primarily a short story character with a smattering of
Well, and a lot of the
novellas.
books that you get have 7-8 stories in them, and things of that nature. But one of the big flaws I had with this story is that scene where the guy shows up in the temple in the rain, and he goes in, and they're appointing or nominating Lord Blackwater to be the head of this magic order, and he shoots the gun and sets himself on fire, right? So that part seems cool. Seems interesting, right? Do you know the flaw? Did you catch the flaw in that scene?
No.
So they supposedly got this flammable liquid on his coat because they were spraying it outside the building when he entered, right? So all this flammable liquid that they were spraying to get on his coat, when he falls out the window to the outside of this building, what happened to all that flammable liquid? And that's a glaring flaw in terms of most Sherlock Holmes stories are fairly consistent. And that's part of why you avoid some of these big stakes, is it's too easy to make mistakes. And that was, to me, I don't know why I hadn't caught that, or it hadn't stood out to me as much as I did in this viewing. But that's a glaring omission in this one.
This film was a Christmas release, Christmas of 2009.
Yeah.
So a lot of its pre-production would have probably been obviously in 2009 and 2008.
Yeah.
And so it made me think Blackwater. Is that an Iraq War reference?
I don't know. You mean Blackwood, not Blackwood, Blackwater?
No, Blackwater, the consulting,
Yeah, I know who Blackwater is. Yeah.
The consulting firm. That's not the word I'm looking for. The hired guns.
The mercenaries?
Mercenaries,
Yeah. After examining, so this gets into some of the smartness of this film. There's a lot of things that in this that unless you know what you're looking for, they don't in particularly stand out. There's lines that stand out, but they don't. The association isn't always clear. So towards the beginning of the film, after they look at Lord Blackwood's coffin, Holmes and Watson, as they're walking away, they in unison say, "The game's afoot, follow your spirit. And upon this charge, cry God for Harry, England, and St. George." Do you know what that's from?
Something. It felt like it was from something.
Henry V.
Ah.
Guy Ritchie, I guess, when he signed on, insisted that the two most common cliches of Sherlock Holmes, the "Elementary, my dear Watson" quip and Holmes' "dear stalker," be dropped entirely.
Yeah, I don't think, does he smoke it? Well, he smokes a cigar at least at one point, or he gives somebody a cigar, but I don't recall pipe smoking.
He smokes his pipe a little bit.
Probably
when he's
on.
when he's sitting in the room thinking.
Oh, okay.
Kind of a funny little tidbit here. Rachel McAdams, I guess they clearly put her in a tight corset for this, and she really didn't like that, and so she tried to trick the costumers, and so she would, when they were putting her into her corset in the mornings, she would push out on her stomach, or she would have previously eaten a large breakfast of oatmeal to give herself added space within her corset, but eventually they caught on and stopped her from doing those types of things. This is another kind of goofy thing. I don't know what to make of this one, but in the stories, Holmes is described as being an expert in baritsu. In the film, however, the martial arts that Holmes uses is Wing Chun Kung Fu, famously used by Ip Man Yi and Bruce Lee. And Robert Downey Jr. is actually a practitioner of that in real life.
Indeed.
In fact, his trainer helped with the choreograph some of the fight scenes in this movie. Oh, Mary Mortston in the books is actually a client, is how she meets Watson.
Oh, okay.
So they're kind of consolidating a whole bunch of things in this, which I don't necessarily love or appreciate.
Well, I didn't mind it that it kind of dropped you into these relationships as already formed, because you probably know the basic contours of these relationships. So that I didn't mind. But as I mentioned before, I didn't like how we were instantly at the world's in peril, which is so comic book and so overdone. It's actually not that dissimilar from the plot of The Great Mouse Detective.
I'm not. I'll have to revisit that one at some point. I don't think I've seen that.
Well, just in terms of they're trying to take over the crown, and
the letters VR are visible throughout the film, and it stands for Victoria Regina, the royal cipher or monogram of then reigning Queen Victoria,
who we will be seeing later this month.
There are repeated references to 5 women murdered by Lord Blackwood before the beginning of the movie. 5 is also the number of women that the bulk of historians agree were murdered by Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper, that's so.
So, one other one in particular I was looking for. The 4 symbols that are referred to in the movie repeatedly. Did you catch the 4 symbols?
There was the eagle feather. There was the ox.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got.
The lion and the man.
All right.
Those are also attributed to the 4 Gospels of the Christian Bible.
Ah.
Matthew was the man, the humanity of Christ. Mark is the lion for courage and action. Luke is the ox for strength and perseverance. And John is the eagle for clarity and sight for divinity.
Oh.
And I've actually heard those references multiple times before. Heard those referenced in terms of a secret order, but I don't remember any of the details.
So it's a deceptively literate script.
And that's part of what I was getting to at the beginning. And I was kind of hoping you'd catch on to a little bit more of that in terms of bringing you enjoyment of this film. Mm-hmm. But
it was drowned out by the stuff I didn't like.
But I intentionally didn't bring any of these up before now. But I was hoping that perhaps, I don't know, on some level I hoped you'd like this movie. Mm. But it seems as though, despite my liking, you don't. So let's jump into ratings. How would you rate this film?
On the 4-star scale, 2, but I could go lower.
Yeah. I'm surprised you're not giving it lower, actually.
1.5 to 2.
Yeah. Mm. How would you rate it on the 10-star scale?
3.
Really?
3 or 4.
So there's a big dichotomy sometimes between you on the 2-star scale and the 10-star scale. How do you go from a 2 on the 2-star scale or 4-star scale to a 3 on the 10?
Well, I mean, that might be a 4 if I was being super literal.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I didn't care for it. It's flat.
Now, despite me liking this film, I think it's an enjoyable film, but I don't think it's a great film. So I actually would only give this 2 stars on the 4-star scale.
Oh, wow.
And on the 10-star scale, despite liking it, I would probably only give it... sometimes to me 7 stars is kind of a threshold for like a quality of a film, so I'd probably only give it 6 stars on the 10-star scale.
That surpures me.
But I still think this is an enjoyable film.
You liked this more than
anything above 6 stars to me is a film you can easily enjoy.
So what are your big what holds you back on this film?
It's inconsistencies, the stakes, like you said, being over the top. In some ways, it's like, okay, where do they go in the sequel?
I was looking, when I was a little bit bored, online at Rotten Tomatoes. Ed Koch is the mayor of New York City. I guess for a time he wrote film reviews.
Really?
And this is one of the films that he wrote a review of. And basically what he said is he thought the cast was fine, but the script was subpar. And yeah. And I think that's something we both picked up on, because I didn't really have a problem with the cast.
But I thought that the script was smart.
Well, okay, yeah. So the script is deceptively literate, but that's kind of like layered down. Like there's these in-references. But in terms of the basic structure of the thing, it didn't work for me.
Yeah. I also thought the shooting of this was actually, for the most part, pretty good, too. Mm. Which gets into my next point, which was... We're going
to talk about the cost.
I was going to get there in just a minute, but I was going to mention that this was nominated for 2 Oscars. Are you familiar with which 2 Oscars?
Probably something with the visuals.
One was Best Achievement in Art Direction. The second one, which was part of why I touched on it earlier, is Best Achievement in Music Written for Motion Picture Original Score. Which, again, is a reference back to Hans Zimmer.
Maybe I'll have to listen to the score. Maybe I'd get more out of it if I listened to the score.
Well, it's a similar... The aspects of this score that I enjoyed are similar to the aspects I enjoyed in the 2010 Robin Hood. But you referenced monetary aspects of this. Are you familiar with what its budget was? You looked at it?
$90 million.
$90 million budget.
Which is, I would guess, a little low for the look of the film. I would have guessed it would have been more than 100.
They must have gotten a couple of the actors for a little bit less expensive than you would have thought. But $90 million doesn't surprise me, especially in
it's a top-heavy cast, too. Yeah. So that cast has taken a good portion of that budget.
Yeah. But its opening weekend, it did fairly well. It opened at $62 million. Domestic gross was $209 million, with a worldwide gross of over $500 million.
Which is why it spawned a sequel 2 years later.
Yep. Yeah, at some point I want you to watch the sequel just to hear your thoughts on it.
To see if the setup paid off, because they did a lot of setup.
I think that they actually fumbled the second one a little bit.
Oh, dear.
Again, this comes back to one of the critiques of this film. It tries to consolidate too much of the Arthur Conan Doyle, it tries to consolidate too much Sherlock Holmes into a single film. To me, Sherlock Holmes is probably better serialized, and I enjoy like the BBC Sherlock now I'm blanking on his name.
Benedict
Cumberbatch. I enjoyed that film or that series quite a bit.
I would agree with you on the fact that it was trying too hard, or felt like it was trying too hard to kind of be everything in one movie. Mm-hmm. I had mentioned while we were watching it that what this movie lacked was a subtitle.
Yeah.
So the sequel was Sherlock Holmes,
A Game of Shadows.
And this one should have been Sherlock Holmes, A Book of Spells, because they referenced the Book of Spells in this film.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I just wanted to touch on a couple of crazy credits for this film.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you happen to know, or notice. Well, we didn't really watch the credits, so you wouldn't have noticed this. But the credit for costume designer is actually shown over a frame, because the closing credits, they do like the drawings of the story.
Yeah.
The costume designer is shown over a frame of the scene in which Sherlock Holmes is handcuffed to Irene's bed, not wearing any clothes at all. Mm-hmm. Actually, that was the only one I wanted to... Oh, no. The only other one was, did you notice on the opening credits, Warner Brothers and Village Roadshow and Silver Pictures logos appear in the cobblestones in the London street? Yeah, that was somewhat smart, but yeah.
Vaguely Harry Potter-ish.
Were those in the cobblestones in the street?
No, because Harry Potter did its own kind of thing with the Warner Brothers
its own creation
logo.
with that logo, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this film, so.
That was plenty.
Yep.
I didn't like it.
Big surprise.
Which makes me a little nervous because it may make you ill-disposed to some of the Sherlock Holmes films we'll watch that I am quite fond of.
Oh, no, I don't think it'll make me ill-disposed to them. I am curious to see, because like I said, I've only read the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes, so I'm curious to see how other adaptations of this, how well I like those. I'm actually genuinely curious to see.
Well, let's pick. Are we going to... Should I draw or should you draw?
Well, I drew last time, so why don't you draw?
Okay. We have 3 things in the hat. Tell me when.
No.
So next week, we're going back to the beginning with 1 or 2 Basil Rathbone adaptations.
You kind of wanted to save those for the end, didn't you?
I kind of did. But, I would not have chosen this as the film to start this month in. Yeah. So we're going all over the place. But Basil Rathbone made a number of these, quite a few of them. In the 40s, they are made to be contemporary to the 1940s. They're not set in the Victorian era. And they're generally around an hour, so we'll probably watch more than one on our next episode.
Cool. Sounds good. Anything else to add to this episode?
No.
Okay, well, I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And we will see you shortly in the next Sherlock Holmes installment of Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. As we start our
Our next theme of the month.
So you really disliked this?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Not as much as... you didn't actively dislike it as much as the 2018 Robin Hood, though, right?
No, you're right. If they're like, you can watch the 2010 Robin Hood, or you can watch the 2009 Sherlock Holmes, I'll watch the Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. Well, 2010 or 2018?
Oh, yeah, right. Hood. But either.
Really?
Yeah.
I am actually still a little surprised you disliked the 2010 as much as you did.
See, this film, I said I disliked it, but it wasn't so much an active dislike as I was just kind of bored and like I didn't feel strongly about this. Like, I didn't care.
Yeah.
I didn't care about these characters.
Yeah.
Even though I think the actors did a good job, I don't think the story was there at a level to support them, and I don't think they got enough personal moments to build those characters and to give you to have any stakes with them. They're kind of thinking you're going to carry these stakes over from a earlier fondness of Sherlock Holmes, that at the same time we feel like we need to kind of spoon feed you who Sherlock Holmes is.
I think this film, its smartness would have come across better if it had only been like an hour and a half.
Yeah, it was too long.
Yeah. I completely agree it was too long. But I think if it was, like in that hour and a half length,
some of that smartness would have translated better.
I didn't think it was very funny.
Yeah.
Like there were some wit, but like I don't laugh. I don't think.
I thought
laughed.
the chemistry between Jude Law and
It was
Robert Downey
fine.
Jr. was fine.
It was fine.
Yeah.
Not exceptional.
I thought it was. Well, maybe I wouldn't disagree and say that it was exceptional, but I thought it was enjoyable and like some of the way they delivered some of the lines I really enjoyed. But yeah. So what do you know? Which Basil Rathbones you're gonna do?
You know what? We may even improvise it.
Yeah.
We'll pull up on what they have on Amazon or YouTube, and just maybe we'll both choose one. But I think they average between like 60 minutes and 75 minutes.
Fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.